how to level up your discovery calls. Hey, I'm Scott Peckford. This is the I Love Mortgage Brokering podcast. And this week I have Nick Atwal, and Nick and I discuss about how he does his discovery calls. And actually, I love this conversation because he talks about how setting the expectation in that first call and explaining how everything works allows him to close more loans. And when he has a client that goes off track, he's able to point back to that conversation to reset them. And this whole thing is wrapped in honesty and transparency, which I absolutely love. And I think if you're a mortgage broker and you struggle with conversion, you're going to want to listen to this conversation. Before we jump into that, I want to give a shout out to our title sponsor, Finmo. Finmo is a Canadian mortgage application, document collection, submission platform designed specifically for Canadian borrowers. It's very easy for borrowers to use. It's got some cool features like Smart Docs. It knows what docs your client needs based on the way they fill out the app. It's got smart submission notes, so it knows what takes key data from the application, puts them in the notes so that you can send it to your lender. We clean it up. And finally, it's connected to Lender Spotlight, which is the best tool for searching rates and guidelines. Check them out at lendesk.com/Finmo and check out this conversation with Nick. Hey, Nick, welcome to the show.
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So, yeah, we were kind of going back and forth about getting it set up, so I'm glad that we finally got to connect. So maybe before we jump into a bunch of stuff that I want to ask you about, tell me about how'd you get into the mortgage biz?
So it was kind of by fluke, I'm going to be honest. So I was still in university looking for a new job. I had a friend whose aunt worked at a local credit union here in Vancouver. And she had mentioned that, they were hiring. So looking for a part-time job in my early 20s, I applied, got in. And long story short, I really kind of took to it quite quickly. So moving from a teller to an account manager, probably within 3 to 4 months.
Oh, wow.
And then being an account manager for almost 2 years. Obviously, being the account manager, it wasn't just mortgages, but it was my introduction into doing some lending, starting off with smaller unsecured loans and then making my way up to, a few mortgages. At that point, I'd finished university after a couple of years of doing that at Van City, and kind of decided that mortgages was the route I wanted to go. I spoke to a few, I guess you could call mentors, who worked at the credit union and outside of the credit union. And they kind of all gave me a similar answer that there's a few different routes you can go once you get into the banking world, and mortgages being one of them. And it's what I took to the most, is what I was the most interested in when I was doing different types of transactions at the credit union. And once I kind of made up my mind, I was all in, and that's all I've been doing since.
Right. So you basically went from that to the account manager. How long till you decided to leave and become a mortgage broker? How long were you between those two?
Yeah, I was an account manager for, I want to say, about 2 years. So in total, I was not a mortgage specialist for about 2.5 years. And that was really just learning the basics of first banking and then the basics of lending. At which point, after that about 2-year mark is when I really kind of got that itch to focus on mortgages full time. And the credit union I was at the time, although they're a large credit union in Canada, just less opportunity for the mortgage specific roles at that time. So I actually went to a major bank after that as a mortgage specialist. So similar to the role, obviously, we have as mortgage brokers, but working exclusively with that bank in a 100% commission role. And I was there for about 2.5 years. So that's where I really started to understand how to do the real estate secured lending, what it takes to be in a 100% commission role. And then about after 2.5 years of being there is when I decided to take that next step and get my broker's license and kind of go independent.
Right. That's awesome. Okay. So then you jump into being a mortgage broker and got a great business that you're working right now. So what is a change that you've made to your business in the last year that you think has been the most impactful or helped you the most?
Additional support is definitely, the number one thing for me. I was a one-man show for majority of what I just explained. So putting in a lot of long hours, doing all of the miscellaneous work. And then I got to a point with, trying to juggle, just the day-to-day activities that you kind of have to do to run a successful mortgage business, and then stay on top of my lead generation and kind of getting out there to grow the business. I was kind of getting to that point where it got difficult. So although I had some administrative help before, it wasn't like a full blown team effort. Versus that's where I'm at now. So in the past 6 months, I've actually brought on a second person to come work with us who is doing a lot of the client facing stuff. Right. So there's the additional support, and then on top of that, I mean, hiring someone is only going to take you so far. I mean, I'm sure you hear it all the time. Like, you can't just simply throw money at a problem. So I would say, the past few months, like, training has been a really big thing that we're doing over here. Like, I spend a lot of time not just telling them what to do. I'm trying to understand their thought process, why they've decided to do what they have, kind of share my thought process as well. So I think just that emphasis on training and really like thinking through the problems versus just like getting to the answer. It's what's really helped me in the past 6 months.
Right. And one of the things I've found is you give them the answer, then what happens is you become the bottleneck. So now they don't actually try to solve it. Again, just come, what do I do, Nick? What do I do? And so you have to be mindful of not just being the answer and, the person with all the answers, because then they don't learn. So like, what kind of things, what has worked well? I'm going to ask more about the training because I think other people have run into this. I can throw some thoughts in this too. What has worked well for training, or what has worked well and what hasn't?
So I would say what hasn't worked well is assumption, because I've been moving at such a kind of fast pace since I've started, is assumptions that some things are basic and some things are not basic. So I kind of had to change that mindset for me and just assume that everybody is starting with, a zero kind of level of knowledge. Baseline. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but you'll never truly know what is simple to somebody else and what's simple to you, right? Everybody has a different perspective and way they look at stuff. What I would say has helped the most is a lot of Teams meetings where I'm sharing my screen, right? So I think that has been probably the number one thing that has taken the training portion to the next level, is working through what it is that we're trying to accomplish, like whether it's something like calculating the income for a file for a certain applicant, or how should we play around with the numbers based on the different lenders' policies to get the ratios to work. Like what am I doing in my head systematically, like what I was just doing naturally before. How do I put that to paper and kind of share my thought process? So doing that on while I'm sharing my screen gives them the ability to give me feedback live. Like, hey, Nick, I didn't understand.
I don't understand what you're meaning there. Or you can clarify something. And then they also get to see the thought process or the why, right? Up behind what you're doing. Not just the how is only part of it. It's
exactly. Yeah.
You have to understand why.
I think once you, at least I learned this way, like once I visually see something, it takes away like that much more of a barrier to just go in and do it. Right. I think sometimes there's hesitation because you don't want to be wrong, or, you don't want to do it incorrectly. And you've never seen it done before. So I think just seeing like 1 or 2 reps, I do a lot of like sports analogies with the team. Right. So just getting a few reps in, and actually just watching it before you get in there, I think it just gives them that, that kind of warm start, just to, it gives them the best opportunity to succeed, I think.
Yeah, I know, that's really good. And with technology now, that's so easy. It's basically they get to look over your shoulder. Yeah. One of the things I've used that I found helpful is just what I call asynchronistic. So I'll just turn on a screen recorder, because sometimes maybe I can't get to them because it's in between meetings. I'm like, my days are pretty booked. And so then it's just a quick screen recording, send it to them. And then they go, oh, okay, I get it. Because a 90-second screen recording can do wonders compared to sending an email back and forth, or even a Slack message or something. And you're just like back and forth. It's like, honestly, if I showed you and like open up the screen, showed you this, and then sent you'd be like, oh, I get it now. And then I found that to be extremely just more efficient when you can't always connect, right? So I don't know.
I'm using, we're trying to use Loom.
That's what I use Loom. I'll Loom a video, and then I'll send it to the person and say, hey, look, here's my feedback on whatever. And then we'll go back and forth, and it's way quicker than even sometimes a phone call. It takes more time because there's always the pleasantries back and forth and you go off on tangents, but this way it's like, bam, they get to see it they don't hear and see it. So I find them to be really good.
Yeah. So far, I think that's been, it's been really effective for us for sure.
Right. Okay. So hiring, what other changes have you made in terms of marketing or finding clients that you've had to, what kind of adjustments have you made in the last, 6 months, given what's been happening in the business?
So I would say, I mean, of course, like the past, I want to say 2 years, but realistically, it might even be longer than that, has been very different for us here. And obviously in the Canadian mortgage market with everything that's going on with the interest rates. So the next thing that I think was a big change for us, and I want to be careful how I word this because we always have in-depth conversations with our clients, but at a 2021 time, it wasn't very difficult to sell a deal, right? The rates were low, right? You could just basically stand outside and you're going to get a few applications.
You hold out a bucket to catch deals. Yeah.
Yeah. And now, the rates are higher, deals are more difficult. When I say difficult, I mean just in terms of getting them approved, right? Like it's just, there's a lot more that goes into it. So having really, really in-depth conversations up front with our client to kind of gauge what their expectations are, let them know a little bit about how we work, what problem are we really trying to solve, and really having those conversations up front to try to avoid a lot of that cat and mouse that I feel like happens in this industry.
This is a great line of questioning. So what would be some of the questions that you'd ask to identify, okay, this is a person that I want to work with or somebody maybe that I don't want to spend time on? Because I think, again, that would be something helpful for our listeners if they're trying to figure out how do I kind of screen for these the right opportunities. So give me some things that you typically would ask or say or look for. For sure.
Yeah. So the first thing I always want to know is like, what problem am I trying to solve? Right. So that's the way I like to word it to myself. I don't like to just say, oh, this is a purchase, this is a refinance, this is a renewal. I'm trying to figure out what is the problem I'm trying to solve? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it might just be a renewal, right? But maybe the reason they've come to me in the first place is that the problem is their renewal offer was too high for them. So now I'm kind of thinking, okay, it's a rate issue, right? Like their main concern is rate. Or if it's, like a refinance, take it a step further. What is a refinance for? Maybe they have a child who's getting married. They want to help with the down payment. Like what is that real problem that I'm trying to solve? Then the second thing, after obviously maybe some income questions, that are standard just to get a level of, what they do for a living and how it is that they're going to service this loan. Once we get kind of past that, I like to ask questions like, how familiar are you with the mortgage process?
Right. Like, if I say to you, I like that you actually start with the problem first versus too often. I think mortgage brokers can get stuck on a product and they're just like trying to jam a product. And it's like, it'd be no different than if you were to go to a car lot and a person's like, I got to sell trucks today. So I'm just going to sell you a truck. But maybe you need a minivan. Maybe you need a sports car, and you're not. So the fact that you're focusing on the problem, then it keeps your mind free to look up for solutions instead of getting stuck on a product. So I think that's brilliant. Now, The second question I was going to ask about that was, so once you've identified the product, what's the next step that you go to after that?
So after that, I mean, I tend to have a pretty good idea of whether or not I'm going to be able to solve that problem right after that conversation. But before going into the, let's get the consent, let's get all the documents, they'll obviously, a question that we always get is what lender can you go to? What kind of rate can you get us? That's where I like to really get into, how familiar are you with this?
Okay, you said that the process. So like, that's what I want to know. Like, so if I let's pretend I'm a customer and I say, actually, I'm not that familiar with the process. How I'm going to take that approach? What would you say?
Yeah, so at that point, I'll let them know from A to Z how it's going to play out. If this is a good fit for the both of us, right? So, right. We're going to submit your application. It's going to be reviewed. It's going to be conditionally approved. We may require new documents. So I'll go through the whole thing with them again, right? So, right. That part, I'm not saying anything probably too different than what another broker would say. I'm just kind of explaining the process. Do you set
expectations for timeline? So let's say, because I like that idea. It's just because even the thing you worded in there, you said, if we're going to work together. So you're actually saying my time is also valuable. What you're saying there is that I'm not going to just, it's not going to be, I'm not an order taker. And the second thing was about basically, you're reminding them about I may need extra documents later on. So do you set timeline expectations or anything?
Yes, I do. Right. So generally we'll know, by talking to the, BDMs or underwriters, what the current kind of turnaround time is. And I'll set those expectations, and, I'll let them know, even to further your point, like if we're going to work together, I make it quite clear, like this experience is a lot to do with us being transparent and communicating well and explaining the process and what's going on. But there is a certain portion of it, if there is, a time sensitive aspect to it, where you're going to need to be quite cooperative, right? Because, I cannot get certain things from you unless you're working with us, right? So I set the timeline based on, hey, if you're able to get us everything that we ask for, efficiently, and we'll help you get that. We can tell you where to get that from. We'll do as much as we can to support you in that process. But ultimately, this timeline is going to come down a little bit to, how efficiently can you work with us as well? Because we do this all day, and this is our job, and we're going to be sitting here waiting to work for you. But, a lot of the times, and I'm sure when you were doing your brokering, you would get an email with the documents after requesting it for maybe 4 or 5 days, and they'd get a call immediately saying,
"Yeah, am I done yet?" It's like, yeah, right. So if somebody does that to you, what would you say to them? So let's say if I was that kind of annoying, I know you've had so some of it, sometimes you can prevent this with that conversation up front with expectations, but even if you don't, what would you say to me if I was the customer who sent you the documents and I phone you up, Nick, like what's going on? How would you approach that?
Yeah, firstly, I would definitely be understanding. For a lot of, we do this all the time, so that, it's normal for us. But for someone who maybe doesn't do it all the time, these are sometimes can be very high stress situations, right? So, of course, understand why it is that they feel pressured, but then at the same time, I just have to be honest with them, right? I think there's at a certain point, the transparency that I try to work with is what helps me a lot.
Right. You're not setting bad false expectations, or hey, this is no problem. It'll be a layup, and then now it's not. Now they're pissed off, and so you're just setting the right expectations.
Exactly. I tell them that first conversation because, sometimes you'll hear, oh, well, I spoke to somebody else and they said such and such. I spoke to somebody else, and I'll say something like, I can't speak for anybody else, but I rather, us have this maybe a little bit more of a difficult conversation right now than in 3 months from now, for some reason you're upset with me because I didn't explain something correctly, or we put you in the wrong product for, just to save time or just to make the rate look better or something like that. So, have all those tough conversations up front, and sorry, I got a little bit off topic there, but to answer your earlier question, if you were a client that came to me and said that, I would just need to explain the process again, right? Which is why I put so much emphasis on it in the beginning, because then, now I'll just reference back to it where I say, remember how I mentioned how, when we submit it, it goes to, the underwriter who has a queue of deals that they're working on, right? Mm-hmm. So as soon as we submit the documents, that's only when the process can begin, so, and just really be patient with them, because understanding that they don't know what's necessarily happening.
They don't know how this works. So that's a healthy, instead of getting frustrated. I've seen some brokers are like, clients are idiots or whatever. No, they're just, you know what? Your doctor could say the same thing about you when you go in because you don't understand their world, or even your mechanic or whatever. So having that frame is actually much healthier, right? I think that's a great way to approach it. So essentially just be patient and re-educate them. So you basically do a little re-education moment with me, essentially, as you're saying.
Yeah. Because I really feel like if someone doesn't understand something, then it's not their fault for not getting it or reacting the wrong way or having false expectations. Because if you don't know all the answers, you're not really if you don't have all the information, it's going to be very hard to give a correct answer or correct feedback, right? So I just try to, make sure that they're in the loop. I don't try to over bombard them with different terminology and things that might not even really matter to them in the long run. But yeah, having them understand what's really going on and letting them know that, hey, we're working, for you and we're doing our best, but this unfortunately is just the process of how things go. Yeah. So I just try to be very transparent. And I think and that's the type of client that I'm personally trying to attract, right? As someone who respects the fact that I'm being very honest, opposed to just saying, yeah, we're going to have it, it'll be done by tonight. And then just like not replying at night and then just hoping it gets done by the next day.
Right.
I don't like doing that kind of stuff. So, it's worked well for me. Right. And then once I have a successful experience with somebody and I've been very transparent, I feel like that's been great for referrals and word of mouth. And, it's just overall worked well for my business.
Right. Where does the majority of your business come from right now?
Referrals. When I say referrals, I mean from my existing clients. I would say that is, I would say my number one source of deals. And then second from my personal network. Over the years, because I've been doing this now for about 8 years, like the personal network and the mortgage network is kind of just all blended into just people who are, who are just referring me deals. But in the beginning, it was a lot of, family, friends, their relatives, their friends. I was really all over the place. If I'm going to be honest, Scott, in the beginning, I was doing anything I could. I was just working extremely long hours and just experimenting with different things to try to get business. I did. And then I kind of got to that point after year one where the existing database was helping generate new business. This past year and moving forward, I think we're going to focus a little bit more on those realtor relationships and different, professionals. It's not that we don't get business from them right now, but it's not something that I necessarily would say that I've specifically targeted or anything like that.
That you try to build on. Okay. And so what do you do to is there anything specifically other than you create a great customer experience, but what do you do after close or that you think helps with generating these referrals?
So I mean, definitely thank everybody for their business, right? So everybody.
What does that mean? Is it a phone call? Is it a video? Like how? Like so, if I'm your customer, how are you? What's the way you're thanking me?
I would say whatever method it was that we were communicating during the time of our transaction, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, so it's a little bit specific. I have some clients who really love dealing with me because they're always on the go and they love text messages, right? So you try to call them, you're not going to get a hold of them, but they'll text you back within a few seconds. So someone like that, they'll get a text from me if that's the way we've been communicating.
And so when would you when would you send the thank you text or call or email or whatever you're doing?
Typically after funding, so on the funding date, I would like to have a message go out. Now as I mentioned, the new added hire, the new support that I have, mm-hmm. We've taken it a step further to visit them if that's something they're comfortable with like a gift basket, right? So I think the last one we did had it was a new purchase. So like some new candles, just like a nice little housewarming basket.
And so do you do that or one of your team members typically?
My team members. Yeah. Right. So she'll be doing that and she'll go out and we'll, even try to get a review. When we're talking to them at that point. And we've actually set up a post-funding campaign now that will hit certain dates and send out an email like 30 days after their mortgage is closed. Like an email will go out and say, hey, it's been 30 days since your mortgage is funded. The gist of the email is, if you have any questions or if there's anything that you're still confused about, please reach out. Right. So just trying to be that helping hand even after the transaction is closed. Mm-hmm. And we've set it up now. So they'll get another email at 6 months and then just periodically up until renewal, essentially. Right. And then we're going to try to win that business again.
Re-engage them. It's interesting that just something as simple as a thank you. Like sometimes, I've definitely been guilty of this. Is like, I got to create this big, like song and dance. And it's like, just say thanks. Like something as simple as that. That's like, oh yeah, but do it every time. And people are like, mm-hmm. Oh, and so I think that's a nice touch and just one of those simple things that people can do. And I want to go back to the discovery. So, because I'm really interested in your process and so when you do this first contact with me, so from your customer, are you doing it on a video, like on Zoom or Teams? Or are you doing a phone call? Like, how are you typically that first interaction? How are you doing that?
Yeah, I would say like up until this point, majority, if not like 90-something% is over the phone. Mm-hmm. Ever since COVID, I've been over the phone for a lot of my initial phone calls.
Yeah.
we're trying to push it more into a video call now. With, Revneet is the new hire who came on. We've been setting up a lot of different processes to have booking links and kind of use all this technology to our advantage. I would really like to start doing it over video. It's something that I see value in, being able to share my screen, show them some numbers, while we're going kind of through the conversation. I think it makes it a little bit more tangible
and more concrete.
Yeah, but so that's something I'm not, I can't say honestly that we're doing a lot of that right now, but it's something that I really hope to be doing a lot of, and we're kind of getting everything in place to make that comfortable, right? Make that easy for the client and ourselves. But just the nature of the job as well. I mean, we're on the go a lot, right? So if I'm getting leads from different referral sources or different people who have questions for me, I'm either in my car or I'm at the office or I'm walking my dog. So at that point, I'm always ready to hop on a call. So it tends to be the easiest way for us.
Right. Okay. And then, so once, let's say I'm your customer, I'm going to walk through this. I'm your customer. We have a conversation. Everything sounds great. I start sending you documents. You get me an approval. Do you then jump on another call? How do you walk, or do you send me a video? What do you do then? I'm curious. Because some people send a video at that stage with sort of a breakdown. So what's your process there?
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that because so currently the process is, you send everything, we'll get the deal approved, and then I'll hop on another call with you once it's conditionally approved to go through those conditions in more detail, right? I like to do that immediately when getting a commitment, right? Just I want to look at those conditions, figure out exactly what that entails, and I'll have that conversation with the client over a phone call. The one thing that I would say I am trying to implement now, which is why it's interesting that you mentioned the video, is that with Loom, I'm hoping to have a video shot kind of for each of these different stages of the mortgage process, right? So like an email goes out with a video of myself explaining, hey, you are now conditionally approved. This is what this means. And this is what happens next, right? Because the message itself from deal to deal, I mean, specifically if it's just on like a residential deal.
There are certain kind of milestones that you could explain to just make it less confusing and reduce stress for them and you. So yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah. So we actually are in the process of building out that. So we have the video included. But currently it's a phone call. Right. So I would say majority of what we're doing is over the phone. And then once we get through the conditions, at that point, my team members will kind of take over and fulfill the conditions. And then I'll kind of come in for the thank you at the end again.
So would you have any tips or tricks for anybody on getting people to actually send you documents? Is there anything that you do, things that you say or do that you feel like helps you? Because it's definitely a struggle for a lot of people.
Yeah, I would say the number one thing that I realize that helps is not just asking for the documents, right? I like to ask for the document, let them know what that document is, if they don't have it handy, where they might be able to get it, and give them the option for us to help get it for them, right? So an example would be, like, say we have a self-employed client, right? And he's a small business, so he's super busy all the time, right? We have a number of people like this that are, self-employed people that are working all day. And they just can't get around to like getting 3 years of financials, 3 years of T1s and all this kind of stuff. So not only do we explain it, we'll just ask, hey, do you work with an accountant? Would your accountant be okay if we emailed them and CC'd you in the email, letting them know what we need? I've realized that almost all accountants, if you're working with an organized one, will have your documents in a folder on their computer, and they can give it to you the same day in perfect formatting, right? So,
right, yeah, not pictures and JPEGs. It's all PDFs and it's scanned. Yeah. You can see it, and so it's much cleaner for sure. So you basically try to make that. So one of the ways that sounds like you mitigate or make document collection easier. Is there anything else that you find that's helpful for getting people? And then, if I'm on a call with you, do you get them to send them a link then to fill out the application, or you fill out the app over the phone? And then what are you doing there on that?
We're filling out the app, I would say, over the phone, like as much as we can. And then when we get those documents, it'll fill in the missing pieces for the most part.
Right.
So we haven't really sent out the link up until this point. I mean, of course, I'm newer to Finmo as well. So we weren't using Finmo before, but even using that application link is something that we've incorporated into our process, like having it as an option.
Yeah.
Again, it comes down to, at least for me personally, and I'm kind of guilty of it. It's like when something is working for me, I just like, blasting it through, doing it the way I'm used to. Right. So I need to get those reps in when it comes to really using that application link. But yeah, it's not something we're using tons right now.
Right. Okay. Is there anything else that I should have asked you that I didn't, you think would be helpful for listeners? This was really good, by the way. I sometimes I like to, you kind of got me on the whole discovery call conversation. So that I went down that path. We didn't talk about that where we're going to go, but I just followed my interest, and I thought I'm thank you for chatting with me about that. But is there any other question or something you think would be helpful?
Yeah. I mean, I would say, to anybody starting the business, I would say, be a sponge. Like, like I mentioned earlier, during the first, couple of years of my career, I was doing as much as possible in terms of meeting with different realtors, meeting with different brokers, right? I would even meet with different people who hypothetically somebody might think of as competition. I didn't think of anybody as really competition. I was trying to learn from them, talking to BDM. So, I mean, I would say in this business, you're going to get out of it what you put in. So if you're new to it, I mean, I would say fully commit to it, and give it an opportunity to kind of, flourish into something, because when I feel like a lot of people in this industry are kind of half a foot in, half a foot out.
Oh yeah.
And they get a little bit of success, so they kind of stick with it, but it's not quite enough to go full time. And the way the industry is going with the constant changes and how, I don't want to say complicated, but how many more layers there are to these policies.
Oh, it's more complicated than a lot of the stuff I did when I started would be illegal today. They're like, yep, you're going to jail. Like what? But it was complete. And the lender was like, I wasn't doing anything illegal, but for the record,
of course.
These policies and stuff have changed so much that you couldn't, you wouldn't be able to do it. So I get
exactly. Yeah. So I would say, if someone really wants this as a career to do, I mean, I understand people have different obligations, but maybe take that leap of faith and really put in that full effort. And then the second thing I would say is try to get comfortable. And again, this is what works for me, but try to get comfortable with those early on discovery calls and being extremely transparent, because a number of the things that you asked me today, where you mentioned, how would you say this if a client said this? I'm almost always referring back to our discovery call.
Right.
Right. So when they say, why is this like this? Like, why is my rate
okay,
this
so
high?
I do have a question now that you say that. How long is your typical discovery call? What is the time that you're going to take on that first call? I got to guess half an hour.
I would say
minutes.
half an hour. Yeah, I would say half an hour if there's a certain base level of knowledge, right? If I don't have to go into what's the difference between fixed and variable that extensively, like things like that can maybe make the call go 45 minutes. I've had calls up to an hour where someone just really wants to know everything, right? And if I can, I usually book the call for about 45 minutes. But yeah, I would say 30 minutes is like standard. And then 45 minutes if there's some more questions.
Right. That's good. Well, and where can people find you online?
Yeah. So we're on Instagram at Coastal Blue Mortgages. Our website is coastalblue.ca. My Instagram is getting a little bit of a revamp, but I'm Nick Atwal and then a little underscore because someone stole my user tag a few years ago.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah. So we're on LinkedIn. Revnita is building out all our platforms. So we'll be Coastal Blue Mortgages on everything.
Right. That's awesome, man. Well, hey, thanks for coming to chat with me. I appreciate it. And thanks for being so transparent about all the stuff that you're doing.
Of course. Yeah. I appreciate it, Scott. And no, I really appreciate your podcast series. I mean, I've listened to a lot of episodes. I know that when we met in Vancouver a couple of months ago, we chatted about it, but a lot of great value coming out from the, different people from here in the United States. And it's awesome to see how so many different successful people with slightly different takes on things, right? So,
and they can still work. And some of it is just I find even our conversation today, some of it's just being reminded of, oh, right, I used to do that and I don't anymore. I've slipped.
Yes.
And then it's go back to the basics, because it's the basics that make you all the money, right? Like it's setting expectations and setting timelines and, and that all this stuff like that. So it's for sometimes somebody's going to listen to this and go, yeah, I kind of, but it's like, okay, are you doing it? Because I got to go back to the basics too. It's like we start to slip over time. So I think it's good, man.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
that's awesome. No,
Thanks,
again,
brother.
I really appreciate it, Scott. Thank you, man. All right. Talk soon.
Hey, thanks again for listening. And hopefully you got some ideas or insights on how you can level up your discovery call. One of the things I find in the business is often when I see somebody struggling and they're like, oh my gosh, I lost this file. I can't believe they left me. In 9 out of 10 cases, it's because something that happened or didn't happen on that discovery call. And you actually set the seeds for the destruction of that file way back. And you maybe didn't even have it, but you thought you did. And you end up spending a lot of time. And so I think discovery call is actually a massive, really important conversation. It's something that we as brokers need to practice. And even as I talked to Nick about, you need to retrain on, because we start to slip, like most of us, professional athletes retrain on the same stuff all the time because it's the fundamentals that make the difference. And so hopefully you found that useful. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please share it with a friend, leave a review. I'd appreciate it. Or you can always send me an email, scott@ilovemortgagebrokering.com. If you got a topic idea or a guest, shoot it over to me. I would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. And as I always say, there's no problem that hasn't been solved in your mortgage business. Your problem is just who's got the answer. Hopefully this podcast gives you some of those answers. Thanks for listening, and I will see you on the next episode.